Hello. Today we're talking about villains. Specifically, how to create and introduce villains in your campaign. So you can definitely have villains that are one-dimensional, I'm doing this because it's evil. I don't particularly find that interesting, but there's definitely times when it's fun and a little bit easy to just have a, here is the antagonist, here is the villain that you have to defeat. Go, have fun. You don't have to worry about figuring out why they're doing this or what their reasoning is, but just the, hey, let's go adventure and defeat a dragon. Whee! But I do think, especially in long-running campaigns, it's much more interesting to have dynamic villains. As I was coming up with the idea for the campaign, I knew I needed to have kind of a big bad. I needed a antagonist for my players, a kind of big bad of the campaign. And it's quite possible that they might end up defeating this big bad and we'll continue the campaign, but I'll come up with a new big bad for them to defeat. So the first thing I did after coming up with a basic idea is I sat down and I figured out what this character's motive is. What is it that they want? Because I knew that would help me figure out all of the rest. And that allowed me to have, okay, here are the steps that they're taking to achieve that goal. And then if the party did anything that messed up one of those steps, I could find a different step. I could find a different route to get to the goal or attempt to get to the goal that my big bad is going for. First of all, motive. The next thing is why? Why do they have that goal? What is it that, and some of this is backstory and some of it is also figuring out kind of their moral compass, their set of belief, a basic set of beliefs, or kind of how they see the world. I'm going to be vague because, just in case any of my players are watching. I don't want to definitely reveal the big bad, but I will mention some tidbits towards the end. So players, if you're watching, I'll let you know when to stop. So with this why is it that they are wanting to take over the world? What is it that is driving them? What has led them here? And some of that is the backstory of figuring out kind of, I don't sit down and write out the entire backstory for all of my NPCs, but I do like to have some major events that I can draw on. For example, one of the NPCs my party just met, Ulurel. She's a cleric. She had been off adventuring, and I knew that she had actually left an adventuring party and kind of had been running a bunch of errands and assignments from her temple because of what happened to her adventuring party, and that was that they all ended up dying going into this mine to try and clear out an infestation. I hadn't figured out exactly what the infestation was, but I knew that she had this really bad experience underground in the dark where she barely made it out alive. And it ended up coming up in session because they went down into the graves, and I didn't really want to rely too much on the cleric with dealing with the undead. She was there just in case anybody needed healing, but I wanted my party to figure out how to deal with it without me stepping in as playing the NPC. So because I had figured out this backstory, she had not wanted to go down into the they went down into the crypt. She did not want to go down there, and when they got down there, the first encounter they had, she wasn't even in the initiative role. She just kind of had this like essentially PTSD moment where she froze up, and finally the party just said, hey, why don't you realize that she was not okay, and they said, hey, go up, get some air, we'll call if we need your help. So I had that figured out. And And that's also something that I do for the villains. I have a few major life-defining moments figured out in their backstory. And that's great because that is stuff that you can draw on, either in dropping little tidbits here and there about the big bad, or you can draw on it if your players come face to face and they have any kind of conversation with the villain. It gives you a little bit more to flesh out, to have that backstory. Another really important thing is to consider that your villain or antagonist does not see themselves as a villain. Unless you're like playing a super one-dimensional, I'm evil and I want the world to burn. But even with that, your villain probably doesn't see themselves as a villain. They probably see themselves as the hero of their own story. They think what they're doing is correct. So keep that in mind as you're making choices. And with that, I think really interesting villains have a logic to them. They have elements that are sympathetic. So things that the characters and or players can look at and say, I understand why you think that way or why you act this way. I don't agree with it, but for me, some of the most interesting villains are ones you can look at and go, oh, I feel for you. I don't agree with you, but I can feel for you. A lot of the Netflix Marvel series do this really well, where they do have villains that have sympathetic moments. And it makes it more interesting and gives your players something more to consider than just like, oh, I have to defeat this thing. You know, if they're sympathetic to it, maybe they might try and find a way to compromise, or they might find a way to talk their way out of it. Whatever the outcome is, it adds a complication to the conflict. Okay, so anybody playing my campaign, if you may have figured some of this out of who kind of the big bad is, but if you don't want to be spoiled, stop watching. Stop watching the video. Thanks, bye. We'll see you on the next one. Okay, so for everybody else. So as I've been coming up with it, and I think most of my players have kind of figured out at least one of the antagonists for the campaign, possibly a second one, because I have been dropping hints. And I think this is a really, and I like, in games that I've played, I've liked having the villain show up early on or get mentioned early on and then gradually learning more and more. It just makes it feel a little bit natural. It doesn't feel so much as like, oh, well, we showed up and now we're fighting this big thing. It feels more like this is the place that we've been leading to. So, you know, in the first session, I had one of the kobolds as it was running away. One of them yelled, Kadru will revenge us, or something along those lines. I don't remember the exact words, but I dropped this name of Kadru. And you know, my players kind of were like, oh, okay. I think one of them actually did write it down, but I think most of them shrugged it up. And then later on, they were reading a book that they had found in the temple that they were exploring, and it mentioned the name Kadru, and that Kadru was a dragon. And that was definitely a fun moment of the players kind of being like, wait, we've heard this name before. Flip back through the notes. Oh, hey, this is what the kobolds yelled. So I dropped that hint there. So they reached the end of the first temple and actually managed to capture and were kind of interrogating one of the kobolds. Interrogating might be a strong word. They were talking to a kobold because he had kind of given up and was willing to part with information in exchange for its life. And through that revealed that Kadru was a dragon. But then they learned because one of my players is a bard and she's always looking through books. And since they've kind of been rediscovering these forgotten cities, there are definitely books in a lot of these temples. I mean, the first one they went to was a temple to the god of knowledge and mischief. So there are going to be books. So in the second temple they were in, I had her find a book that was kind of an overview of the recent history of the Empire. Now, granted, recent history was from 1,000 years ago, before the elves and magic had disappeared, but in this, it was written that Khadru had been defeated over 1,000 years ago. Khadru had been defeated recently. So that was fun, putting that bit in there. Definitely, I could see my players kind of being like, okay, well, they said Khadru was defeated, but why was this kobold recently saying the name Khadru? The most recent bit of information they found a book of recent history from about 1,000 years ago that said that Khadru had recently been defeated, and that Khadru had been defeated after pretending to join forces with one of the elven lords who is trying to overthrow the ruling family. So it's been fun. I've been dropping these little tidbits about Khadru throughout the campaign. Not every session, but every couple of sessions, they learn a little bit more and a little bit more. So it is building up to it. So I think giving bits of this information gradually, it helps build up the villain. It adds some suspense because you're gradually learning more and more. And it also is not an information dump. It's not, hey, we're gonna go research and get all of the information. I was trying to avoid that. So I was making sure that the books they were finding referenced were kind of like, oh, hey, this was referenced like in a paragraph, and they happened to pop out because they had heard this name before. But it wasn't like, here is the villain's life story. Because you want to avoid those like, you got me monologuing moments. So it's been fun, and there are definitely a number of other antagonists that my players are going to run into throughout the campaign, but those are kind of the things I keep in mind when creating villains, whether it's for a story or for the campaign that I'm running. So how do you create villains for your campaign? Do you start out with an idea? Do you start out with the stats like, oh, I know I want a lich, or I want a dragon, or I want a beholder as the kind of big bad of this campaign? What are the aspects about a villain that you like to have worked out? Let's chat more about it down below. I want to give a special thanks to all of our patrons over at patreon.com/rollforinitiative, and I want to give a special shout out to Arvi, Bryce, Sean, Lainey, and Joan. If you're interested in becoming a patron, helping support us, and also getting cool perks like getting to see videos a day early or see some extra stuff that we put up there, you can head over and check out what pledge level you'd be interested in. So don't forget to like and share the video. We make videos here every Tuesday and Thursday, but if you want to make sure you don't miss any videos, make sure to hit that subscribe button, and you can hit the bell for notifications. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time on Roll for Initiative. Bye! This is silly. This is fun. Whee! I have new light panels.